Hi folks, I'm Steve Safaro with Security InfoWatch, and I'm really happy to be here with Dale Buckner. You're the CEO of Global Guardian, and Global Guardian, God, what does Global Guardian not do? You've been very busy, I know, with a lot of the threats that have been happening, and Ukraine.
Yes, sir.
And being a good guy when others have turned tail and run. But let's talk about first how your session went, building an effective emergency plan. This is something that has been done over and over and over again, but a lot of folks don't realize how much it's more of experience and knowing your situation awareness than anything else. So how'd the session go? Obviously, you had a full room,
yeah,
and everybody left very, very slowly, and you had a lot of
questions
people,
after.
People, like a lineup of questions. What kind of questions did, without identifying the people, what kind of questions, what was on the mind of the GSX community?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. It's been great to be here. I think what you're seeing is there's a movement afoot within the country, domestically, where corporate America is realizing that you can have consultants in, you can build a plan, but if the plan is not communicated, if the plan is not rehearsed, and you don't stress test it, and your employees aren't aware, and they're not trained properly, you're almost guaranteed to fail when it actually goes live with a crisis. And I think that's trending that way. And I think the audience, really the biggest takeaway, most people don't know, even though they're in the security industry, don't know that the standard from the federal all the way to local law enforcement policy is that with active shooter that we talked about in detail today, is you're waiting for the quote-unquote cavalry to come, SWAT to come in, full police force, and most people don't know EMS and fire, policy-wise, won't go in until the entire site is secure. So I think that opens people's eyes up, and I think what we're shooting for here is we want to educate, we want to inform, and most importantly, we want to frame the issue of, look, you have a corporate responsibility to prepare. If you're just waiting for others and government agencies, if you would have to solve that problem, you're probably going to have a bad outcome. And I think
this is so amazing that you brought this up, because this has come up 3 times today, and yesterday, one time yesterday, and the gunshot detection, situation awareness, detection solutions, they're all focused on saving time and allowing the end users, the practitioners, the schools, whatever, the tools to be able to shorten that time frame of response, but respond yourselves. And
Steve, that's the message.
I'm glad you...
There's a lot of tech firms here selling great technology. We're all about technology. I think it's the future. We're going to solve problems with technology. The one caveat is technology alone is not going to solve this problem.
Correct.
It's just not. Being able to shut doors doesn't stop the shooter. Being able to alert people of the situation and show on a camera where the assailant might be is not going to take down the threat. Mm-hmm. So you have to have all of it. You need the tech, you need the policy, you need the system, but most importantly, if your people don't have a plan that they understand, it's simple, it's communicatable, there's somewhat of a chain of command. You'd be stunned, and these are scary scenarios, right? Most people are not geared towards this, and they're terrified. You just need 1 or 2 leaders that are willing to say and guide people and give them direction to where they can flee, give them direction where they can hide. And then, most importantly, who's going to take that threat down? Who's going to fight? And you hear those terms a lot, but the execution of it, there is no simple answer. There's no one button solution with technology to solve this problem.
Oh, of course not.
It takes it all.
I wasn't intimating that at all.
Yeah.
And actually, the one thing that I found is that no one knows how they're going to react.
That's right.
Until they're in it.
Yeah. So Steve, I was in the Army for a very long time. I went to combat several times. There were people in quote unquote peacetime, which was the first 14 years of my career was quote unquote peacetime. I rehearsed and practiced to go to war, right? There were people that were in great shape, they were very motivated, they were very macho and ready to go to war. The reality was some of those people you thought were really, really good in peacetime failed massively in combat, and it might be the quiet guy, it might be the smaller guy that end up winning silver stars and bronze stars and being heroes because they don't panic. They understand the environment and they can digest it mentally and physically. They can absorb the environment. They can operate through it without being terrified. And you just can't predict that. No one can look at a human being and based on their run time or how many push-ups they can do or how long they can, road march and so on and so forth, how good a shot they are. Those actually aren't indicators of how you will operate or respond in a traumatic event like an active shooter or a war zone or something like that.
So they trusted their training.
They do.
The little guy,
That's right.
ran it over.
That's right.
Over and over in their mind.
Yep.
Subjected themselves to it.
That's right.
And what's interesting, I'm one of those little guys that actually went through a virtual reality training. And I realized it's not for me.
Yeah.
But, I went ahead and got my concealed carry. But the bottom line is I went to virtual reality training. And the thing, I think it's important to get shock tested, to understand that you are not going to know how you're going to react until you step off that elevator or open up the door and you hear those gunshots.
Look, human nature is we can't predict how we're going to respond to trauma. We just can't.
So how do you expose people to that?
Well, you train and inform and educate. And then when it happens, you're going to have some people that respond appropriately. You're going to have a wide majority that panic. And again, you just need 1, 2, 3 people that are willing to take charge, can calm and control themselves under stress. In Special Forces in the Army, there was this old Sergeant Major who's now on my board, who I love. He used to teach all of the initial operators at Delta Force, and he called it brilliance in the basics. Don't make it fancy. Don't try and go too fast. Just execute brilliance in the basics. And it applies to these scenarios where if you can operate under stress and do the basics well, you can communicate, you can direct, you will end up, saving people's lives. You'll end up with a better outcome. And that's really what everybody's looking for here.
So are you able to do that and identify the people?
Not wholly. I don't think you can ever truly identify, even with as much psychological profiling goes into creating a Navy SEAL or an Air Force CCT or a Special Forces operator, all those things. We do our best with, taking blood samples and measuring stress and people being interviewed, but at the end of the day, even with all that, you never know.
And people have to have backups.
Of course.
And whoever, is it a matter of training as many people as possible, plus the faith that
of course,
a few will
of
arise?
course. And that was really the message to the audience today. There's a responsibility to not just have a plan on a shelf that gets dusty. You got to communicate it, you got to rehearse it, even if it's just 2 hours a year. Twice a year you spend an hour going through this. You at least set the framework where people know where to go, what to do, in broad principle, knowing some will fail and some will step up and solve that problem in crisis.
So the assumption is you have to do something within the first few seconds to prepare yourself and to prepare the people themselves and execute a plan.
That's right.
As though no one is going to be there within the period of time that's
right.
most
Again, if
significant.
I use this term, if you're waiting for the cavalry, i.e. law enforcement and RSO, SWAT, EMS and fire, statistically, they're not supermen. We don't have assets sitting on every corner of every town. That's not real. It's going to take them, in most cases, on average, it's 7 minutes to respond till you have some level of law enforcement response. And then it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could be more depending on where you're at in the country and how big the law enforcement, EMS and fire police stations are and how well they're funded and resourced. And the reality is most of these active shooter scenarios are done in 10 minutes or less. So you see the window.
What's the plan? Obviously you need a plan.
Yeah.
But what are some of the basic elements of the plan? You mentioned communications.
Yeah.
So obviously, one of the leaders would say to a group, start getting on the phones.
Yeah.
You two are responsible for constantly dialing 911, whoever you can reach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 2 different numbers.
Sure.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Put your phone in the mode so that people can locate you.
Sure.
Hopefully, the school has enabled the first responder access of their voice over IP system.
Yes, sir.
Which, by the way, per my research, most of them have not.
Correct. My answer is really,
Why?
it's principally based. My answer is, well, I think it's budget.
How do you overcome private? No, it's built in. It's built into most of the voice over IP systems and privacy
on the tech
has
side, sure.
overcome that.
Yeah. I think ultimately human nature dictates that it's always going to happen to somebody else.
Right.
People are inherently lazy to have to go through a drill and take time out of their normal day-to-day schedule. I think
Wow.
that's the biggest problem.
Wow.
Ultimately, this is all principally based for me. Every school is going to be different based on size, geography, so on and so forth. But for me, the key principles are, do you have a plan that's realistic and well thought out? Do you communicate that plan? And not to everyone, but at least key leaders. And then do you rehearse that plan? Whether you want to take your kids through that at the school through a fire drill and everybody leaves and so on and so forth, or you don't want to do that, regardless, the leadership of the school have to have that plan, they've got to communicate it, and then they have to rehearse it. If you follow those 3 steps, you will inevitably have a better outcome than if you don't do those things and that plan just sits on a shelf. And that's what we see over and over and over in corporate headquarters. They bring in consultants, they build a plan, it's too complicated, it doesn't get communicated, it certainly does not get rehearsed, and that's where it all goes sideways.
Now, you have some tools that are very interesting.
Yes, sir.
I think you even have a mobile app.
We do. So we can track people in real time. If they hit the panic button and they're connected, anywhere in the world, I can see where they're at down to 50 meters in 20 to 25 seconds. There are all kinds of technologies like what we sell and what we do that are helpful in these scenarios for any kind of emergency response, if you will. But I will reiterate, okay, fine, you just hit the panic button, whether it's an active shooter,
What do you do?
whether you're in a car accident, whether you're in the next terrorist attack, whether you find yourself stranded. The real question is not, I now know you have a problem and where you're at. The real answer is who's going to respond with what asset to fix that problem. And that's where corporate America fails. They're very good. I just got done briefing. The standard model is 80-20. They use that term, 80% prep, 20% execution. We think in the pace of the world and change, it's a lot of prep with very little. I think a lot of things get assumed away on the back end. We want to change that model to 50-50 to re-emphasize the need for the last mile. That's where everybody fails. We spend a lot of time on prep, we spend a lot of time on technology, but we don't ask the hard question of, okay, how am I going to actually solve that problem in the terrorist attack, the war zone, the hurricane zone, the active shooter? That last mile, and with the frequency of these events, the last mile is where these vendors, if you will, are failing because everybody kind of assumes those things away.
Right.
And they say, oh, law enforcement will take care of that, or a vendor will take care of that, or insurance will take care of that. It's not real.
So do you bring the tools together when somebody brings Global in for a consult?
We do. So the whole point of Global Guardian's model from day one was, and we thought the opportunity was, one, let's not just execute 1 or 2 services like most. We want to do it all. So travel security, tracking, intelligence, global medevac, medical services, cyber, camera surveillance, access control, and then a whole host
Travel
of...
security is a big deal.
Well, it's getting bigger, especially with the diverse workforce. When you have a workforce that's now 30% of the Fortune 1000, it's never going to come back to the office. You now have to treat that individual working from home remotely as if they're in Brazil, or they're in Kenya, or they're in China. They now expect that same level of support if there's a tornado, a flood, an active shooter, they get hacked, so on and so forth. And that's where the dispersed workforce is really creating all kinds of issues.
Wow, so they haven't considered, so their company's complexity got even worse because now everybody lives in different geographic areas.
Of course, that, and when you think
they want
about,
to stay home.
That's right. And if you think about the cyber problem that creates, think about this. You now have hundreds of thousands and millions of employees working at home on an unsecure router on their own personal device, whether it's laptop or cell phone or desktop. The software might not be updated. It's not on a platform that's provided by the company. So you saw immediately, once everybody went home in the beginning of 2020 till today, we now have a whole nother set. The FBI task force has said just on national security issues, we've seen a 51% increase in cyber hacking.
Wow.
Now, corporately, we have seen 252% increase in ransomware, ransom cases, being hacked, so on and so forth, because you have so many people on unsecure systems that are not sponsored on an overall platform, and that's where it fails.
You know, it's interesting. The other day, I went in for some cervical spine treatment, and that company, which is stellar, went with a different check-in organization that has clickbait on it.
Yeah.
I could not believe, and I tried to explain it to the
What
office
happens to
manager,
that data? Yeah.
and they actually got upset at me.
Yeah.
But so all of a sudden, you have to assume that every remote employee has TikTok running on their machines.
And who owns TikTok?
Yeah. So so you've got your work cut out for you.
Yep.
And the public has their work cut out for.
Yep.
Are there any, from what you see from some of the questions, I could say, is there hope? Are there people that are asking the right questions?
Yeah. I do believe it's a matter of, if you're running a business, you don't want to take a reputational risk. You don't want to be sued. You don't want to have a poor morale within your workforce. These things matter. I think you brought up companies and individuals, is there a right answer? I think the country has a challenge. The country as a whole, we've been running as a global superpower for a very long time. I think that pieces and parts of that, it's going to get more difficult to keep that status as we move forward over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. There's going to be a whole host of new challenges we simply didn't have 30, 40, 50 years ago. But I think corporate America, the upside of being in a corporate setting is that when you have a problem and it can hurt your business, corporate headquarters will find a solution to mitigate that risk. And I think we're going in that direction. And I think you're seeing C-suites around the world that are operating globally are now acknowledging insurance is not going to cut it. We gotten away with cheap insurance forever. It's not going to work. You're seeing that we now need systems for the deployability of assets to move in minutes and hours, not days and weeks. Insurance is going to clean up the mess financially. It's not going to operate in real time. Those realizations are now coming. And I think from a national perspective, as a country, as divided as we are, I think our systems did endure a lot in the last few years, but they held. And I am very hopeful that we will find our way back to a center where we have more balance. And I think if we do that, we'll be just fine.
But there needs to be corporate leadership.
There does. And I think I talk about this a lot lately. The fabric of our society has become a bit unwound in that social contract. There is a contract between our citizens and its government. Parts of that are frayed, and some of it's deserved and some of it's not. Some of it's just the environment and being on social media and being so connected. That being said, I think corporate headquarters and CEOs are filling a void that 30 years ago the government, through government policy and government systems, filled. And I think your employees in corporate America, there's an expectation that you will have an opinion. That could be on LGBT, that could be on social policy, that could be on what we owe other countries, that could be on environment. There are all these things that are kind of flashpoint topics.
What about farms being purchased?
Yeah,
right next to government.
Right, facilities and monitoring. There's a host of things that are going on within the country.
Yeah.
But I do think, and surveys show, if you're a CEO and you have visibility in the market, if you don't take a position, you will be equally criticized as if you do. So our advice, and we do this often, we're incredibly transparent, we're out there, we talk about these issues because I'm not going to shy away from it. Because if I don't talk about it, I'm going to be criticized just as much as somebody that disagrees with my opinion or our position.
Courage, and that's what you're teaching.
And I think that has to come out. I think this is something where...
So be courageous.
That's right. And I think you have to, because studies show it's going to be 50-50 anyhow. You might as well control the narrative. I want to control the narrative. Not everybody's going to like it. Not everybody might like our stance on the future of environmental policy and what's going to happen and why. If you look at the increase in tornadoes and the power of it, the increase of hurricanes, the global warming and so on and so forth. Whether you believe in it, don't believe, none of that matters. What matters is the outcome of these events have now affected supply chains and companies and people. That's undeniable. So it's at least address that. Now, why it's happening, we'll leave that to the politics and people can believe what they want to do. But I don't want to shy away from it and say, oh, we can't talk about that because people have different opinions.
Let's get to 50-50.
That's right.
So how do we get to 50-50? Through your company?
Yeah.
So you are Global Guardian, and the website is, let's see here, globalguardian.com. Nice and easy.
Yes, sir.
And you can request virtually anything. Security, asset security, cyber readiness, personal, government, global coverage. So let's do it. Let's be brave as corporate professionals. Very, very important. And the message is, let's use the combination of technology and law enforcement, but don't rely on it solely irresponsibly. Right?
That's right. I think everyone has a responsibility in this. You can't just allow to think that somebody else can solve these problems for you. It's not real.
I love that 50-50. Dale, thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
This has been great. I hope that you get a keynote here next year.
Good.
Because this has been fantastic.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.